Right. Welcome to PHTA's weekly webinar series on Wednesday. My name is Adam Ketchmarchi with the PHTA Education Division. Joined with me, as always, is my colleague Diana Bouts, who is our master and commander behind the scenes getting our webinar series put together. This week, we are super excited to have some representation from the U.S. National Water Safety Action Plan and its steering committee here as we continue our water safety webinar series through the month of May. We would like to thank Pentair as the sponsor for National Water Safety Month. And just a few reminders before we get started. We do have some live upcoming virtual Genesis education. We have just recently scheduled Genesis C260, the Genesis Construction School for vinyl liner and fiberglass pools. That's going to be available virtually in July. We also have our Genesis D280 History of Pools and Water features that'll be available virtually in July. And I do want to make a note with C260, if you're looking to take that course, this will likely be our last offering in 2025. So it's a great opportunity, no matter where you're at in the country, to access that course. We also have our upcoming mastermind event that'll take place September 23rd to the 25th in Fort Lauderdale. We have a number of Genesis educational offerings at that event, so we encourage you to check out the PHTA events calendar on the website. And then we also have our Genesis Roadshow that has concluded this spring, but will pick up again in the fall. We will be with BioLab offering C281, and we'll be with Pentair offering E211 in November. PHTA also has just released its new pool math course. Feel free to check that out on our learning management system. Then we also have some upcoming webinars. These happen every Wednesday. Next Wednesday, we will be joined by Steve Barnes, who will be doing a presentation, Pool Pros and Water Safety, Everything Everyone Plays a Part. And then we have a special webinar scheduled for May 28th dealing with the topic of tariffs. We'll have navigating tariffs in the pool and hot tub industry, strategies for resilience and growth. Attendees can participate in today's webinar by using the chat function at the bottom of the screen, as well as the question and answer function. We'll be monitoring that through today's presentation, and we'll get to as many attendee questions before the end of the webinar as possible. So for our presenters today, we have Megan Ferraro, who is the current chair of the U.S. National Water Safety Action Plan. Megan also serves as the executive director of the ZAC Foundation. We also are joined by Tina Desart, who's the plan's administrator and works day to day on the plan. Tina is also previously worked with USA Swimming and USA Swimming Foundation. Megan, Tina, I will kick it over to you to get us started.
Great, thanks, Adam. So we put together just a brief slide presentation to kind of bring everyone up to speed on the history of the plan and a little bit of kind of a general purpose, all-purpose roundabout way of looking at the plan and all that it includes. So Adam, if you could advance the slides. So we're going to start by looking at a basic overview. We'll look at how the industry intersects with the plan, how we can engage with the plan, and then what available resources there are for you. When we talk about an overview of the plan, there are many components within the plan itself. So we'll start with the history, just to bring you up to speed, materials, and the supporting resources that are also available for you. So let's start with the vision. Really, when the steering committee came together and started developing the plan, we really wanted to look at what's the long-term goal, right? And as we look at the industry as a whole, obviously we want to see a United States where everyone is safe in, on, and around the water. The mission itself for the plan is to prevent drowning in the US through evidence-informed action. By doing so, we'll transform the country into a nation where water safety is a natural part of everyday life and people enjoy the benefits of the water safely. So what is the plan? The plan itself is the national roadmap for collective action. The framework and the tools to support development and implementation of evidence-informed, context-specific water safety action plans at the state, county, and community level. And I'll dive into this just a little bit more. As we were developing the plan, one of the things that we realized as we compared with other countries was the makeup of the US is vastly different than other countries who had initiated the plans within their own space. And so as we looked at it, what we realized was it's not going to be a one size fits all. across the country. Georgia is different than Florida, is different than Minnesota. And so we really had to look at how do we create something that will work for everyone across the span of the US. And so what we did was we came to a point where we determined it's best to provide the context and let the individual communities determine what's going to be best for their community. So that's where we're talking about the context-specific water safety action plans at the state, county, and community level. The third point here is that we identified national actions. So if we look at, kind of a federal level, more or less, that support the implementation and also increase the likelihood of success for local plans. So really what we're talking about here is kind of sandwiching an approach to developing plans and strategies at the local level. So if we have national actions that can support things that are happening at the local level, then certainly that will help to bring things to fruition. So scope and framework. The plan itself was developed as a 10-year plan, launched in 2023. And right now we're looking at 2032, right, as the quote unquote end term for this specific document. That said, it is a living document. And so we're currently working on how do we continue to advance it? How do we continue to update it as we go through this 10-year cycle? The plan was developed with a focus on 5 evidence-based strategies, plus the space of data and the necessary infrastructure and capacity to support the implementation of the action recommendations within each of these spaces. So the 5 evidence-based strategies are barriers, entrapment, and electrical safety, life jackets, personal flotation devices, and other flotation, rescue and CPR, supervision and lifeguards, water safety, water competency, and swimming lessons. And then the 6th component, as I mentioned, is data and public health surveillance. Each of these bullet areas developed into specific working groups, which then provided the recommendations for the plan itself. So this was the process starting in 2018, but what I will say is we'll take it as a step back by about 6 months or so. In Vancouver, the World Congress on Drowning Prevention was held in 2017, and a number of agency representatives that are part of Water Safety USA were participating in that particular conference. And so when we all came back and had our meeting for Water Safety USA and had looked at the number of countries that had developed plans and strategies based on the World Health Organization's recommendation, we kind of sat around the table and went, well, why not the US? And so that was the impetus of getting the plan going and developing the strategy, and the process was that particular conference. So this kind of schematic, if you will, kind of outlines the process of the development of the plan itself. So we looked at the scope and the framework, which we already talked about. Within each of those subgroups, we established co-chairs, and then each of the subgroups looked and did a situational analysis for each of those components. So for example, rescue CPR, they looked at what is the landscape for rescue and CPR within the US, and where do we need to focus our attention based on what evidence is showing or not showing, where are there gaps. Develop action and gap recommendations. So this is where once they looked at what was existing or missing, then we looked at what was the next step. What are the things that we need to put in place? What can we recommend that will make the most impact in reducing drowning numbers across the US? Following those recommendations, expert reviewers and stakeholders participated in a survey. Within this process, there were hundreds of folks that participated, and so we gathered great feedback in order to move forward in the process of what recommendations did we feel were the most important. Were they worded correctly? Were there things that were missing perhaps? Do we need to prioritize things a little bit differently? So there was a lot of feedback that was received from the industry itself within that process, which was great. From that point, we also developed the national implications. And so again, looking at kind of this layered approach, what are the recommendations that can move the needle at the state, county, and community level, but what are the things that we could implement at the national level from a national scope that would help to support those recommendations? And we'll dive into some of those a little bit deeper later. From there, we went to a blue ribbon panel. So we had experts within the field, and then also within each of the subject matter areas to really look at the final recommendations to determine what really needed to be reworded, what really felt like it rose to the top to be included. Certainly there were more recommendations put forward by the working groups than were included in the final draft of the plan. And so it was a kind of coalescing of minds in order to bring things to a place that was reasonable to be able to publish and put forward. From there, we developed the plan. We have an implementation guide and some additional tools that go along with it. And then we launched and formalized the U.S. National Water Safety Action Plan itself and brought it to implementation in 2023. So along the way, there were certainly some challenges, COVID being one of them. So we all learned as a steering committee how to manipulate the technology in order to continue to move this forward. The biggest challenge that we all realize is lack of government mandate, right? So if we look at the comparison between the US and other countries, a lot of other countries that have gone down this path have government support behind them. And so it was a struggle, and it continues to be a struggle, as we know. So some of the ways that we attacked this, if you will, were to focus on the collaborative approach, both in the development and in the implementation of the plan. So looking at how do we build the relationships within the industry and outside of the industry in order to best support the plan and the implementation of the plan. We do have participation of government agencies, and we did within the working groups. So currently Water Safety USA, as I mentioned before, has government agency support within it. And so a lot of those government agencies continue to be active in supporting the work of the plan today. We do continue to advocate for federal support. I'm not going to say that we don't have any. We do. It's a challenge, and it continues to be a challenge as we move forward, but we need to continue to advocate for that support. And then certainly formalizing the plan itself in order to support the implementation process. Like anything with water safety, right? There's a lack of funding specifically to this particular area. So we worked with a very low budget. We had a lot of in-kind contributions, in particular the steering committee, the working group members, those who participated in the Blue Ribbon panel. It was all volunteer hours, lots and lots of them. And so we were able to bring it to fruition because of the dedication and devotion of those who were participating. So we're very thankful to that. Advocating for collaboration of national organizations on the national implications. This is still ongoing. So one of the things, if we consider a national implication, let's say around life jackets, right, then we want to look at how can we get buy-in from the boating industry in particular, right? How do we bring them into the conversation so that we're working together on developing whatever those recommendations and implications might be. Again, advocating for federal support from a funding perspective, and then formalization of the plan to support fundraising. And that's something that we're now going down the path of, which will help to move the needle, hopefully, from a fundraising standpoint. Uptake of the call to action. Certainly when we're working with or starting with a steering committee of 7 to 8 people, being able to disseminate the plan itself and get the word out was a challenge. And so we really worked on a strategy. We developed a website. We've got guidance and technical support to help educate folks on how they can utilize the plan and what's a great way to implement the plan within their communities. And then again, advocating for collaboration at the national organizations, because we know if we have the support of the national organizations, there's a trickle down effect into the local communities. So the plan itself does include 98 evidence-informed action recommendations within, and that's all inclusive, but spread between those 6 working group spaces that we mentioned previously. There is a reflection to action planning process, which we'll talk about here in a second, which is basically a guidebook or a toolkit, if you will, to help with the planning process, national implications to support the national agenda, and then a research agenda, which is coming soon. So the action recommendations themselves are now housed, while it is in a PDF document that you can download from the website, there is now a database on the website that you can access and search through all 98 of those action recommendations. And we'll dive into the detail here on the next slide, but you'll see the key areas of action listed here, which we've already spoken of, that started with the working groups. So barriers, data and public health, life jackets, rescue CPR, lifeguards, and supervision, and water safety, water competency, and swimming lessons. So within each of these icons will take you directly to those recommendations. So this is a screenshot from the website, which kind of highlights how you can filter through the 98 recommendations. There are a number of different ways to access this page and this information, but really what we're looking at is this first column is the working groups or the key areas themselves. The next section is the spectrum level. So let's say you're interested in rescue and CPR, you want to look at all the recommendations that have to do with influencing policy and legislation. You can filter those to that specific piece. And then from an implementation level, are you looking to develop a county plan, a statewide plan, a community plan? And so you can filter again to that. And then evidence level speaks to when we went back and looked at what was all the evidence that was provided by the working group. How did the evidence rank, right? Do we have a high level of evidence that we can go back to? So if we're looking at actual research that's been done, right? And we were able to list out a number of different research projects that support the recommendation. Or was there a lower level of maybe research, but expert opinion within the field provided enough evidence to be able to support the movement forward of the recommendation itself? So that might be where that low evidence level might come into play. But these are all filters. You can use all of them or none of them, depending on what you're looking for and the space that you're working in. So if you dive into a specific recommendation, and I understand that this is small, so I hope that you'll visit the website, but if you go into a specific recommendation, so for example, this one is require inspections for pool safety compliance on property transfer or remodel. Okay, so this particular recommendation has content that provides the rationale for the recommendations, the anticipated impact, the evidence that was provided, the evidence sources that were provided, what are the high-risk populations that were addressed by this recommendation, evaluation metrics. So if you were to implement this, how would you evaluate success? Implementation itself, what are the things that you need to think about? What are the things that might be a challenge to implementing this recommendation? Potential facilitators, who are the people, who are the organizations that you might look to in order to help implement this recommendation in your community? And then if there are gaps, or there were gaps found by the working groups for this particular recommendation, is it that there might need to be more research in this particular space? Those gap recommendations are also listed. Each of the 98 recommendations that are listed on the website has this page with the breakdown and all of the detail that was provided by the working group when they put the recommendation forward. So now we'll talk about the reflection to action process. So this is kind of that toolkit that I mentioned, right? So let's say you're in a state and you want to develop a state strategy, then this is the workbook that you want to go to. The process is outlined, and I've broken it into 2 slides so you can see it a little bit better, but it basically breaks down the process of developing your own plan. So getting started, partners and collaborators, who do you need to have at the table to have the conversation and start building a plan out? What are the waterscapes and hazards in your community? What is the existing drowning data? Where are the sources? What are you finding? What are the current efforts that are in place, right? It might be simple. It might be there's a swimsuit drive down the road, right? And they're doing great work, and they're bringing in 4,000 swimsuits a year to provide to swim lessons and to kids who maybe don't have the opportunity to learn how to swim because of it. So looking at those current efforts so that everyone who's at the table is on the same page with what's happening within the community already and what's missing. So then we put it all together, right? So we've got this basic concept of what's happening within the general community, and now let's bring it all together. You can move to the next slide. So then we take the next step. What are the critical issues? Okay, identifying the critical issues that you have within your community is now key to determine where you're going to go from here, right? What are the potential actions that would solve some of those issues? How do we prioritize them? Then we start to look at SMART goals, right? How do we develop the objectives, the roles, the responsibilities, and the steps to move all of this information forward and to generate the plan itself? And then we move into launch and implementation, and then monitor. Anytime we're going to bring something forward and we're going to launch it, we want to make sure that we include that monitoring piece so that we can see the change over time. So the national implications, as I mentioned, are actions at the national level that will support the uptake and implementation of the recommendation. So again, that sandwich approach, what can we do at the national level that will help things move along faster at the local level? So things like creation of a national drowning surveillance working group so that we can assess what's happening out there with surveillance and data. Establishing national minimum standards around life jacket use, around pool fencing, around swim lesson curriculum, you name it, right? And these are things that are outlined within the plan. Development of advocacy toolkits and model laws. Again, tools and resources to develop so that you at the local level have something to help aid you as you move forward in the planning process. These are the things that the national implications really are there to do, is to support the work that you're doing at the local level. And then, of course, advocacy at national level to encourage the engagement of national organizations and federal government support. All right, so how does the plan intersect with the industry? How is it relevant to the work that you do on a day-to-day basis? So here's some examples. So right now we have a number of working groups in place that are focused on those national implications, one of which is the Model Legislation Working Group. They're currently working on a template and a toolkit to aid the states, counties, and communities in proposing adoption of the ISPSC as it relates to residential pools. Okay, so that directly relates back to the work that you do on a day-to-day basis. Another thing is the SWIM Act, right? So PHTA is pushing for advocacy for federal funding of public pools. That falls right in with how the plan intersects, because we want national support, we want national funding support for things in the water safety space. One of the action recommendations, barriers entrapment number 8, is to adopt the ISPSC for new and substantially remodeled residential pools and spas in its entirety, including the PHTA 7 standard for suction entrapment and avoidance. So again, you can see how the plan and some of the recommendations are connected to PHTA and the pool and hot tub industry as a whole. Another example is to recommend an existing isolation fence with an alarm system as an adjunct layer of protection for residential and semi-private pools and spas, secondary to an existing isolation fence with a self-closing, self-latching gate. Again, barriers entrapment 14 is the number that's associated with this particular recommendation. Again, just pulling examples for you so you can see how the plan overlays with the industry and how it connects to the work that you do on a daily basis. So how can you get involved and how can you engage with the plan? Lots of opportunities. You can explore the website for one, and this slide presentation will be available. So I've built the links in to help you go directly to all of these options. You can join our mailing list. We have a quarterly newsletter that comes out, which keeps everybody up to date on what's happening with the plan, any new things that are coming out with the plan, if there are educational opportunities, if there are connections or opportunities to participate in working groups or things of that nature. So it's a great opportunity to connect with the ongoing work of the plan. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Those links are here as well. We have weekly posts that are going out for things and ways that you can engage with us. You can participate in monthly office hours and educational events. Office hours are similar to, if you think about college, if you had a question for your professor, you would go to office hours and they could answer the question for you. If you're working on developing a strategy or a plan and you have questions, office hours are a great place to come. They're the third Wednesday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern time. It's listed on the website. You can register ahead of time and you can ask questions both of the steering committee, but also of your peers, which is really, really helpful. We alternate between state office hours and community office hours monthly, but we've crossed over many times depending on what the direction is that the participants want to take. And so we roll with it to see so that you can get the information that you need and be more successful. Support implementation of the action recommendations in your state, county, and community. I think that's a big one, right? The more support that we have at the local level, the better the plan is going to be, and the more successful it's going to be in the long run. Engage with the national implications and its working groups. There is a web page that is going to come soon, and so there will be an opportunity for you to champion, if you will, a national implication. If there's something that you want to help move forward or move the needle on, then there's an opportunity for you to connect with us through the direct link for that particular national implication to say, hey, I'm interested in participating in this, or if there's an existing working group, I'm interested in joining the working group. I really want to be a part of it. So the web page is going to be really helpful in engaging in that space. We'll do something similar with the research agenda. The research agenda should be finalized mid-summer, I believe. And so the website and the web page for that will be very similar to the national implications, where if you are able and willing or know of a university or someone who is willing to champion some research in a specific space, then there's also an option will be on that page for you to connect and champion that particular piece of research as well. You can advocate for and report local planning efforts. So we have a report actions page where you can click on the link and fill out the information and say, hey, we've got a plan that's being developed in X city. I got an email today from someone who's working on building out a plan in the state of Nebraska. So it keeps us informed. One of the things that we're looking to do over the course of the next several months is build out a map for the website that will highlight where action is taking place, so that not only the steering committee, but also those across the US who are working on plans have a visual and some context around what's happening in the US, but also some contact information if you have questions. We know the state of Hawaii launched their plan back in February. Sometimes we want to reach out to them and say, hey, how did you do step this, right? How did we get across the bar on, this particular topic? And so it's nice to be able to have the option and the contact information to be able to do that. As we talked about funding previously, there's also an option to donate to the plan. With everything that's happening with the government right now, we can't necessarily rely on government support and funding. And so we do rely a lot on the industry to assist in supporting the plan as it moves forward as well. Some summer specific engagement opportunities. One of the things that we're doing right now is we're asking for you to share your story. We're collecting photos, videos, news stories, you name it, through the website. There's a link on the website for that. The goal for this is every year on World Drowning Prevention Day, the World Health Organization collects content from across the world and shares it back out, right? And we want to be able to highlight the work that's being done in the US. So on behalf of that particular effort, we are collecting all of that content and we'll submit it to the World Health Organization on your behalf. One of the other pieces that plays along with World Drowning Prevention Day on July 25th is we'd like to ask that you light the nation's landmarks blue on the 25th, if possible. And so that'll be a campaign that you'll start to see across our social media pages in the coming month. If you have landmarks in your community, then go ahead and fill out those applications if it's needed, so that we can start moving that process forward. And then again, we'd like to see that content shared back with us so that we can again share it out with the World Health Organization. I mentioned state and community office hours. The registration links are both on the homepage of the website and on the resources page of the website. It's also linked through the last page. But the upcoming one for May is on the 21st. And then we have community office hours on June 18th, and then state office hours again on July 16th. So we just launched our resources page, where you'll find all kinds of tools. I've built in the link directly to the resources page here. There are videos and recordings from our State of the Plan webinar that we held in January, recordings from monthly office hours where we've had special guests. We're going to launch a webinar series here talking about the different stages of the reflection to action. All of that is available on the resources webpage, as well as additional links, links to copies of plans that other states have developed, resources from the World Health Organization, resources for data access. And so there's a wealth of information that lives on that resources webpage. We're really excited that that's launched. And then coming soon, as I mentioned, we're going to launch the webinar series, which this first kind of episode, a couple of episodes on the Reflection to Action webinar series is discussing accessing and utilizing local data sources. We've interviewed 4 experts from 4 different states across the country with really high drowning rates. And so talking to them about the specific resources that are available within their communities, and in order to help those who maybe are getting started in the process and might not know where to start. And so very easy way to access from a 20-minute, if you have 20 minutes, you can pop into one webinar at a time. The National Implications webpage I talked about is coming within the next month. And then the Research Agenda webpage will be launching later this summer. So this is the website, watersafetyplan.us. And anytime you have questions or need to reach out, you can email us at info@watersafetyplan.us.
Tina, thank you for the presentation. I know I'll leave this up on the screen for a while, so if folks want to copy down that website or go visit or capture the email, they'll have the opportunity to do it. I have a list of things I want to talk about, and I do have to disclose in full transparency, I also am a member of the steering committee for the U.S. National Water Safety Action Plan. So I have been working with Megan and Tina alongside them, and alongside, I guess we should mention there are some missing steering committee members from today's presentation. We do have Connie Harvey with the American Red Cross, David Bell with Scouting America, Morag Mackay with Safe Kids Worldwide, and Lindsay Monzek with YMCA or Y of the USA. And then Rebecca Ware Robinson was also part of our steering committee as well through the development plan. So I can't forget Dr. Linda Kwan with Seattle Children's and the American Academy of Pediatrics, who's also been an integral part. I want to start our discussion going back to the very, very beginning. Tina, you brought up the 2017 World Drowning Prevention Conference. And I want to really highlight that event because previous to that, in 2014, the World Health Organization released their first global drowning report. And they listed 10 action steps, one of those action steps being, every country should address drowning within its own borders, either through a national strategy or a national plan. And I think we in the US all saw that, right? And then we land in Vancouver. I know the 3 of us were all, there and, probably had this conversation live on the ground, but I hate saying this, but it was almost quite embarrassing because we were the only high income country, being the United States, that didn't already have a plan. And I think that launched us all into some action once we got back home.
I would agree with that, Adam. I remember feeling ashamed in a lot of ways that countries that had much fewer resources than the United States had plans not only developed, but that were in the implementation stage. And so it's taken us longer to get there, but as Tina mentioned earlier, we're one of the few countries doing this without a government mandate and without government funding. And so it's taken a lot of volunteer efforts and a lot of grassroots strategy to get us where we are today. So something to be proud of for sure.
And I think that is actually, that was going to be the next point I brought up, Megan, is the fact that we do lack that government mandate, right? Even still to this day, there hasn't been a law passed by Congress or a directive by a federal agency or the administration to say this work has to be done, right? This was, and I really want to emphasize this, this was the work of a lot of organizations across the aquatic and water safety space, not just those on the steering committee. I know there was representation and involvement across the board, but I want to dive a little bit into some of the U.S. differences there. But do you think that would have made a difference had, our government really mandated this work being done or really more substantially supported it, maybe even earlier on than what they did?
I'll just say from my perspective, I do think so. I think having paid staff in place to move things along. I know at the time that we started this work, the three of us had, and I still have, a full-time job with an organization. And this was really, a big effort, 10 to 15 hours a week spent on this project that had to be done outside of the scope of my daily job. So I do think if there had been a full-time staff dedicated to nothing but this work, we would have gotten there more quickly. What I think is really nice about the way this worked out is because it wasn't government mandated, it was so inclusive. I mean, I think we had over 250 members of the field involved in the process, whether that was through sitting as chair of working groups or sitting on working groups or being a member of the Blue Ribbon panel or simply being a part of the interview process as we develop these recommendations and identify those gaps. So I think it worked out the way it was meant to, but it certainly took a bit longer than it would have otherwise.
Well, and one of the other things that I want to just highlight about the United States that I think is a unique aspect is we are a large country. We're not the largest geographically, we're not the largest by population, but we are a diverse country by geography, by climate, even by some socioeconomic standards. And drowning touches each one of those pieces, right? So, really identifying kind of what the national strategy is in the US, what national things need to take place. But then I just really want to center that this is really a project that, we're hopeful that states and communities will also pick up because, well, we can look at this, from the federal landscape or a national landscape, really, the issue of drowning is different state by state. It's different in Florida than it is in Colorado versus, Virginia. And really diving in and learning those local nuances is really important to this process. And I think we kept that kind of at the heart of what we were doing.
Yeah, and I will say, I think we changed gears a couple of times throughout the development process, right? Like initially, we thought that we could put together a more simplified plan, if you will, and that would roll out and everybody would be able to utilize it in the same way. And the further we went down that path, the more we realized how different each area of the country was, right? And what the needs were really going to be. And I think we're starting to see that play out as these plans are being developed and the drafts are showing up. Hawaii's plan is certainly a lot different than California's plan. New Jersey's plan is going to be different than both of those, right? And it's a matter of, I think, the way and the opportunity to be able to look at all of the recommendations. And once you've identified where your risks are and what your needs are, is to be able to go back to the recommendations and say, okay, well, based on what we're seeing in our community, these things make sense for us, but these don't, right? So it's not that you don't have to utilize all 98 of them. You find the ones that make sense to you because we've given you recommendations that are evidence-based. And so you don't have to, we've done some of the legwork for you, I guess, in that sense.
Mhm. I want to ask Megan specifically around these state level plans. I know as the executive director of the Zach Foundation, TZF has really been a leader at getting a lot of this work kicked off in some states across the country. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that experience and maybe how it, was similar but also different from looking at the national level.
Sure. And I'm actually going to take it a step even more local than that, Adam. When I came back from that conference in Vancouver, I sat down at a board meeting and kind of laid it all out that I was so ashamed and disappointed that the United States was so far behind the rest of the world. And so the decision from the board after that meeting was that instead of trying to take on a state plan or even a national plan, right? We should start hyper local. And so we started having what we called, community focused water safety strategies that were developed. And that process really informed a lot of what we ended up doing on the national plan. We were able to really understand how critical it was when all members of the field came together. And that doesn't even really mean the water safety field. It means every member of a community, whether it's, an aquatics director, a Department of Education head, even a preacher or a radio host, really ensuring that every piece of a community was plugged into the work was really critical to the success. As we continued to build our work and we're involved in the California Water Safety Strategy, um, seeing the very diverse landscape in the state of California, a state that's very engaged in water safety and drowning prevention already. But what we found was that many of those partners were working in silos. So they wanted to collaborate, but they didn't know how. They wanted a roadmap, but they couldn't even begin to imagine what that would look like. And so working at that high level in the state of California, helping to develop that strategy and that roadmap really dovetailed so nicely with what was happening on the national level. And I think those plans actually came out within a few months of each other. And it's amazing that while those projects weren't aligned necessarily, California didn't so much as borrow against the water safety plan as we will see have happen in states like New Jersey and Florida and Texas. They really do mirror each other quite nicely. And seeing that work happen at the local, state, and federal level has been really exciting and, gives me a lot of hope about the future of water safety and drowning prevention in our country.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me too because not every plan needs to look identical, right? And I'll even call this out because I think I've gotten this question. I know both of you have gotten this question from industry members over time. Is well, if other countries were ahead of us on this, why didn't we just kind of copy their model, right? And speed this along. And I think it goes back to that kind of uniqueness of the United States, especially as it relates to aquatics and recreation around water. Um, and I will call out, we did look at all of the other national plans across the globe. And I know, talked to Canada and Australia and Great Britain and their representation multiple times along the way in the development of our plan. But I think that goes to the state level and even the local level, is not one model kind of has to fit all with this, right?
Well, and it can't. Whereas in some countries, they have one plan for their entire country, and that's it. In the United States, we have 50 different jurisdictions, right, at a state level that we have to operate within. Unfortunately, we can't say, here's the plan. Each state has to decide, one, that they want to engage, and two, really develop a strategy that's unique to them, that addresses their specific geographic concerns, their socioeconomic status, their cultures, and really have a clear picture of where they already have strong programming. Because one of the things that's so important to mention here is that the United States has a ton of incredibly passionate and successful water safety programs. And so it's all about like building on what we already have in place, connecting individuals and organizations that may not be connected, and helping to ensure that everyone has access to these programs. And so I think that those strategies do look different, unfortunately, in all 50 states. But it gives a lot of opportunity for folks to be involved in a big way. If you are sitting at home in Ohio and you really want to bring a plan to your state, connect with us, join our office hours. We'll help you identify partners in your in your state, in your county, maybe even that can help you develop that plan, and that can be in at the ground level and really bring a unique program and plan to your state that is so needed.
Yeah. I do want to jump to the local level a little bit because I know we talk about this in a variety of fronts, but I think it's also relevant here when we talk about kind of planning action at that state and local level. Really understanding the barriers that exist in a community, right? What is not working? Is there easy access to learn to swim in a community? I've recently learned, I was in a conversation with one parks manager of a major city on the West Coast, and I was asking, what are the barriers that you're currently facing with Learn to Swim? And I said, is it scholarship money? Is it, what's that barrier keeping families from really joining in? And they said, it's funny you mentioned scholarships because we do have scholarships available, but what we find is that's not always the only barrier to those families. It's also transportation. It's the, cost of a swimsuit. And I want to call out the New Jersey Swim Safety Alliance. They have been really active. They helped create the New Jersey Water Safety Plan. And they've started a swimsuit drive because they saw that that was a barrier happening in their state. And I can't remember, Megan, every time I talk to Judith, she tells me how many swimsuits are in her basement waiting for disbursement. But even going through this process, I think it's going to be eye-opening to kind of recognize where we can actually truly make impacts in our local communities.
Right, and those impacts are as, I mean, as small, although her bathing suit drive is anything but small. She's delivering brand new high quality bathing suits to boys and girls clubs and youth centers and schools all throughout the state of New Jersey, and is really good at convincing people to make donations, which is such an amazing skill. So, she has been able to impact thousands of lives in the state of New Jersey through that program, and it's been really important. You also look at efforts like the American Red Cross Centennial Campaign. They are providing access to water safety program to thousands of not only youths in our country, right, teaching them how to swim, but providing CPR training to parents and caregivers, which we know is critically important should a drowning occur. Providing lifeguard instructor training and water safety instructor training and certification, and swimming lessons for adults. So you see really big efforts like that and more grassroots ones like that, those that you just described. And then you look at an effort like the Orange County, California Drowning Prevention Coalition that is led by our friends at the Jasper Ray Memorial Foundation, Julie Lo Piccolo and Jonathan St. Clair. And they are doing this out of filling, a void in their hearts, right, from the loss of their son, and really trying to make their community safer and ensure that their loss doesn't happen to another family. And so that's a huge level of effort in addition to, their work on the California Water Safety Coalition and running the Jasper Ray Memorial Foundation. And then of course, like their full-time jobs and roles as parents. So, there's all different ways that you can get involved in your community to give back and to ensure that everyone has access to safe and affordable swimming lessons and water safety training. And that happens not only in the pool, but also in what we refer to as dry land settings. So, teaching water safety programming in a classroom, in a gym class, reading one of the many, many, many children's books about water safety and drowning prevention at your local library, really being sure that if you're encountering parents of young children, that you're educating them about safety around water, about supervision. My sister and her husband just moved back to the Philadelphia area from North Jersey, and they bought a house with a pool. And before the pool was opened, they installed a four-sided isolation fence last week. And I'm so proud of them and so grateful that I didn't have to have a conversation with them. They've been listening to me for the last 15 years. And so something as small as a conversation about layers of protection is so important to this work in our country.
Yeah, well said. I also want to touch on it, Megan. I think we're going to pick up on something you mentioned just now is, everyone has a role to play when it comes to something like this. I mean, just even the pool and hot tub industry, water safety is much wider than just our industry. There's a lot of involvement from pediatricians to the boating community to schools to our pool and spa industry professionals, and the list goes on and on. And I want to balance in this conversation that, even though our plan is evidence-based, in some areas there is weak or little evidence surrounding some areas. And I just want to highlight that, to me, one of the most favorite parts that I saw of bringing this plan together was seeing the community of, industries that touch water safety come together, who frankly maybe don't necessarily agree on certain steps around water safety, but really work to form consensus to move this forward, right? And I think that's something that, 10 years ago, I didn't think I would see, or I thought maybe it would happen 20, 30 years later. But to see the amount, I mean, we had 250 plus organizations and individuals, participate in the development of the plan, the review of the plan, but also now the implementation of the plan. And that list is growing and growing. So I just wanted to give each of you an opportunity to talk about that kind of consensus piece of what this plan is. Tina, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think it's been, like you said, it's been really fascinating to kind of watch the evolution of collaboration in the space. I think from the standpoint of when we started with the working groups, right? It was looking at who are the experts in these spaces for each of the 5 key or 6 key areas, and then letting them bring folks to the table, right? And it was in their purview to bring the right people to the table for the conversations, and making sure that all the voices were heard. I think one of the things that we made sure to implement was the survey option. So even if someone wasn't involved in this, like a working group specifically, they still had an opportunity to participate. And I think we were very selective and very careful to ensure diversity, equity. We brought in experts even in those spaces to make sure that as we moved the process forward, that the language was inclusive, that we had the right people at the table to be able to provide the context around the direction that we were trying to go, to make sure that we were moving in the right way. And I think when we look at the agencies that participated, both federal agencies, for profits, nonprofits, whether they were, water safety specific or manufacturer specific, it really didn't matter. I think everyone had a voice and a role to play. And the fact that not only the steering committee had that mindset, but everyone who was kind of in a quote unquote leadership space was able to participate in that way, and had the same thought process behind moving things forward.
Megan, would you like to add anything?
Well, Tina said that very well. I would say the only other few things I might add would be ensuring that affected families, so families who had experienced a fatal drowning or a non-fatal drowning, and in some cases, were able to participate in the development of the plan, so that their voices were an integral part of the work that we were doing. And we saw that at every stage of the plan's development, which I thought was really exciting. I also want to give like a major kudos to the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance. Where your industry is today certainly feels a lot different than it was 10 years ago. And even as I look at your involvement in the National Action Plan, but also the Step Into Swim program that PHTA is running, is reaching so many children and convening stakeholders and nonprofits and swim schools in ways that really has been so exciting to watch. And so having industry really a part of this safety process in ways that I hadn't seen historically is really exciting, and is going to help us get much further along. PHTA's members are the ones that are interacting with pool homeowners, they're interacting with aquatics directors. You have direct access into those people that can make the biggest impact in providing safety resources to people all across our country. So even, you all having us on today to talk about this is really wonderful, and certainly a sign of things heading in the right direction.
Well, one thing that I always have to bring up, I equally agree, Megan. I think, watching the evolution of not just the pool and spa industry, but, really everyone connected to water safety has just been really awesome to see. And, This is probably more in the water safety space, but someone came up to me a number of years ago and said, well, I just can't believe you're doing this in connection with the Red Cross or the Zach Foundation or USA Swimming or PHTA. Like, aren't they your competitors? And I always find that so interesting when people bring up that concept, because we're all organizations that maybe work in the same space, but and maybe we're used to saying, because we work so closely, inside the kind of, interagency and working together on that. But, to me, I think we are so much more aligned and working together on so many things than we are separate. And I think that gets stronger year over year. Before we hit the top of the hour and run out of time, I just want to highlight one other time the website for the U.S. Action Plan. This is a fantastic resource. The PDF version of the plan that you can download from the website is equally as a great resource. There's a lot of context, a lot of history in that document that kind of sets up the plan. But you only actually get to read the recommendation in the PDF version. The website, as Tina showed in the presentation, really allows you to see not just the recommendation, but the rationale behind it, the evidence basis, key communities that could be impacted, high risk communities. So it's just a fantastic resource. It would take you a long time to go page by page, line by line, but please know that resource is out there. And there's, as Tina mentioned, there are more resources to come over the summer and into the next year. So, Megan, Tina, I appreciate you joining us today for today's webinar. I know National Water Safety Month is a busy time for everyone involved in water safety. Just a few reminders before we go. Thank you to Pentair for being our National Water Safety Month partner. PHTA is joined by NDPA, the American Red Cross, the National Park and Recreation Association, and the World Water Park Association in putting together National Water Safety Month. We do have, just as some reminders, some live virtual Genesis education coming up. In July, we'll have Genesis C260, our Genesis Construction School for vinyl liner and fiberglass pools. That's the last time that course will be offered in 2025, so it's an awesome opportunity to join. And we also have Genesis D280, the history of pools and water features, being offered in July. And then be sure to check out our mastermind program that's happening September 23rd to the 25th in Fort Lauderdale. We have numerous Genesis education courses taking place, as well as a great conference program. And just as a reminder, we have upcoming webinars every Wednesday. Next Wednesday, we'll be joined by Steve Barnes from Aquastar, continuing on our National Water Safety Month conversation on pool pros and water safety. Everyone plays a part. And then we have a really special webinar coming up to end the month on May 28th, navigating tariffs in the pool and hot tub industry, strategies for resilience and growth. We look forward to seeing everyone next Wednesday. Again, Tina, Megan, on the whole Action Plan team, thanks for joining us. Thanks to Diana for helping get our webinar series up and running every week. And we look forward to seeing everyone next week. Take care, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Adam.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.